check, check. Check, check. Mic check. Mic check.
All right, I think we're gonna get started. It is quite early, so we're expecting people to kind of fall in the next few minutes. Before I forget, I just want to mention if there are someone who don't want to be taken photos of, we have a photographer with us today. What was your name again? Kevin. So please let Kevin know if you don't want to be taken photos of. And Nora as well. So the two people with cameras. All right. Well, welcome to SoCentral. For those of you who haven't been here before, especially, my name is Sophie. I'm partner in SoCentral, and I just wanted to mention briefly who we are. So we are a small nonprofit company who works in the gaps where no one really has a mandate to do something for society, but society has a need for it. So we work, for instance, on how to get more kids within sports through partnerships and collaborations. We work on urban city development in a huge urban network called Pådriv that many of you might know of. And hi, welcome. Just feel free to have a seat. There's many free seats in the front here. And we have also in the past few years been working more and more with democracy because we see that there are a lot of voices who don't participate, who don't get or they take part in our democracy and don't find ways into it. So in SoCentral, we've been working a lot with turn off. I'm back on. But we haven't worked that much with digital democracy. So this is very exciting. And the space that you're in is our community for social innovation. We have about 250 members being part of this space who all work on a societal issue and want to be part of a bigger community with others doing so. So if you're curious about this space, please come and talk to us. We're a bunch of people from SoCentral here today. So if everyone from SoCentral could just raise your hand. So feel free to have a chat with us. And we're excited for this panel, so welcome. Lastly, there are also bathrooms outside of the elevator over here and at the end of the venue here, and there's coffee on the table there. So I hope you all feel at home. So signing, do you want to take us into the event?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophia. So my name is Sveinung. I'm a researcher at OsloMet, and I will be facilitating our conversation today. So just a very brief introduction to the questions that we raise in this session and this event. And those are, can digital tools help strengthen democracy in Norway? What can be learned from experiences both in other countries and so far in Norway from the use of digital tools for citizen participation? And what are the opportunities and limitations of using digital tools to create a more inclusive and participatory democracy? So the cause of our event today is that Roslyn Fuller is visiting Norway. She is author of several books that we have here. Beast and Gods, so very strong defense of participatory and direct democracy. And we also have In Defense of Democracy, which I guess is a continuation. And finally also the Principles of Digital Democracy, which is one of the more comprehensive books that I've seen, at least on this topic. You're also the director of the Solonian Democracy Institute, that, for example, write reports on which evaluate different digital tools from all around the world. So you're really welcome. We'll begin with your introduction. And after that, we have 3 designers or interaction designers that will comment on your presentation. So we have Alma Kulén, which is a professor of research, interaction design, right? At the University of Oslo, studying connections between technology, design, and democracy. Then we have Elias Oldebakk, who's from the design agency Traverse, who's also been designing an app for citizen participation, which is called Aula. I guess you will talk a little bit more about that afterwards. And we also have André Helgestad from the Oslo participation website. So before so what are a digital tool for democratic participation? Let's begin with André, who's going to show us first the participation portal from the Oslo municipality. So if you want to come up, introduce the site, and show us a little bit what kind of functionalities you're working with.
Sure. Thank you so much for the nice introduction, Sven. So I'm gonna get you all onto the platform. To do that, you can just QR code into this process, because we wanted to make a little participatory process for you as spectators and participants here today, so that you can also contribute a little bit. But also, we are testing a new functionality, and here you can kind of say whether you support or do not support some different kind of statements. That is to just be used for us thinking more clearly about what people actually think of these things, and to make us kind of comfortable later for more of the dilemmas that are in digital democracy. The participation platform, we got that from a Belgian company called Go Vocal, formerly known as Citizen Lab. And we are 2 people hosting a public participation service inside the municipality, where we are supporting over 150 project leaders in hosting processes that are already existing. So we're digitizing them, but we're also trying to broaden the way we do public participation by using these tools to. You're not getting onto it.
I got it. I'm just reading out Go Vocal, and I'm like, so carry on.
Yeah, right. So you can. So if you struggle to enter, it's more like you have to log in with the bank ID. I tried to make it possible for you to log in with the email, but we made it so on the platform that you don't register locally, because we wanted to have certified participants. There are processes where you don't need to log in, but that's more like anonymous surveys. And I do get why this new beta function do have verification, because you have to either say you support or do not support something. And if you were to get like accurate results from the public, it would be really nice that it was real persons that answered, so that people wouldn't like try to manipulate that. And I see some people might be struggling. Is that right? We can troubleshoot later as well. That's part of what we do also. And I see quite a lot, at least 8 of you have participated already. In the next phase, we'll just try to do a very like simple input phase, where we'll open that after our discussion, so that your the ideas that you've been bubbling on while we're talking can be contributed also. And I'll do my best to answer them if we take them into account at later points, and try to have like a good feedback loop on you. So this is what the participation platform looks like if you're working in the municipality. And we also have a guide for those that host processes here, so that they know so that before they host a process, they think more clearly about what they will do, how they should build it, how to reach out, think more clearly about what we've received, and what happens next. So that's really simply how we kind of try to guide the different project leaders to host platform processes. And there's a range of different processes right now. Around 4,000 users that have verified themselves, and at least over 15,000 participants since we launched it now in August last year. So it's taking form finally. I think I'm not going to say so much more than that. Just take part of the process, and let's continue the conversation.
Okay, so thank you so much, André, to letting us look a bit into the participation website. We'll get back to this at the end of the meeting before we conclude. But Roslyn, what can we in Norway learn from participatory digital tools, and is there a reason that we should apply them more than we already do here?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I actually have prepared a short presentation about this. Um, so, first of all, thank you all for coming today, also so early, and also thanks to Andre for presenting. I found it actually really interesting to look at that website before I came here and to see everything that's going on. So today, obviously, I'd like to talk a little bit about digital democracy, what's possible, but also why we need it. So I think it's really important not to lose sight of that. And also, I'd like to address some common pitfalls that I see occurring when I look at these things. So first of all, what's possible? The answer is pretty much anything you can imagine is, at this point, technically possible. So these are some screenshots from tools around the world. A lot of them have been in use for years now, some of them even decades. This is Citizens Foundation, which is used a lot in Iceland and Scotland. So in Iceland at this point, there are double digits of the participation, of the population participating in participatory budgeting. So it's very, very well used, one. This is Alligo, which is an Italian software that we recently profiled, which is used mainly for elections in universities and businesses. So it's another really interesting application that people don't think of a lot, is for use in business meetings or union meetings. So shareholder voting is also a really important application. These are some petition software from Baltic countries. So what you can do is you can sign up to petitions online, and if enough people do that, then it goes forward to the parliament, where whatever the petition is automatically debated in the parliament. And this one here is Epistemos, which is a voting application I really personally like. This one's really exciting because it uses artificial intelligence to summarize and translate automatically legislation and comments. So actually we did a kind of demo of this in the South Pacific last year, and it was actually really, really interesting to see people talking to each other across different languages, like in real time. I've seen on X or Twitter recently people kind of talking to each other across languages very recently in the past few weeks. We did this last year, actually, and with lesser known languages, so very lesser spoken languages, which is a lot more complicated to do. So it was actually really cool to see that. So this will only get better, actually, because there's a lot of hype around digital technology, and especially around AI, but there's also a core of truth to it, because digital technology is based on breakthroughs in the physical world. So in our ability to physically capture and manipulate data. And because of that, there's actually kind of a long tail of cascading effects where more and more things come possible as it develops. So I think something that's already possible with the technology that's been rolled out over the past few years that's very, very useful is people being able to query government information in a targeted way. So, for example, up until now, it's been quite difficult sometimes managing these tools because you want to give people information, but you also don't want to dump all the information you have onto the internet. That's a bit too complicated. It becomes impossible to see what's going on. You also don't want to necessarily put a selection of data on there because that can be biased. So because we have this AI technology now, in the future what can happen is if someone has a particular question, like for example you could say, how much does it cost to run the street lamps in Oslo every year? That is probably not a question most people are interested in. But if you are interested in that question, you can ask it and you can get an answer. So that will help a lot. Also, being able to potentially answer questions that people may have while they're participating. So up until now, a lot of the time, a government employee has to be there and answer all the questions, help people use the tool, things like that. This can now, potentially a lot of that work, not all of it, but a lot of it could be done with AI. And that's really important because people often don't realize that there's a lot of work going on in the background at the government municipalities to actually run these exercises, if you want to call them that, and also to use the data that comes out of it. So sometimes people, they think everything's on the internet, it's no work anymore. It is a lot of work for the people in the background, and that can really help to lighten the load on that and ensure that things actually get done. So that's also the technology. Those are just a few of the possibilities out there. There's way more than that. But I think it's really important to remember, this is kind of the core of what I want to say here today, is that politics, at the end of the day, is about people. So it's really important to ask ourselves, why are we doing any of this? You know, I mean, we can look at technology sometimes and we can say, oh, wow, it's really cool. It can come across as very gimmicky. It can also come across as saying that there's a tendency to lean into it in the sense of it can make improvements and there's good things that it brings. And it does bring good things. The good things it brings are quite considerable. But I would today like to talk more about the bad things it prevents, because that's actually what motivated me to start down this line of inquiry. So the question is, why do we need direct democracy, be it online or offline, right? I mean, in Ireland, we have direct democracy offline. We have referendums. Online just makes it easier to do things. So why do we need direct democracy? I think because people need leverage. Nothing ever in the history of the world politically has ever happened without leverage. And I think a really interesting example of that right now is at the hotel I'm staying at. The employees are on strike because exactly that, they're trying to get leverage. They're making it very uncomfortable for the people who own the hotel, right? So we all understand this concept, generally speaking. So why do we need that? I think it's a very severely underappreciated fact of our society that we live in a post-revolution society. So people in the early 20th century lived through a major revolution that lasted for decades and killed hundreds of millions of people. So that there are castles as tourist attractions and villas as public schools all over Europe is a clear sign that you're living in a post-revolution society, because all that stuff used to belong to someone and they didn't just decide to give it away. So this revolution that our grandparents or great-grandparents, depending how old you are, experienced really amounted to different shades of socialism, fighting with each other and fighting with the aristocrats who used to rule the place. So hardline socialists, that is to say communists, conquered a pretty big section of the world. Until recently, they maintained control of that section of the world. So over here in our part of the world, the aristocrats really had no choice but to make common cause with the bourgeoisie, that is to say, us, to avoid the, for them, much, much worse consequences of totalitarian forms of communism. So what that means for us is that we have lived in a society where for a long time, the most powerful members of that society have acted in a certain way. For example, supporting social programs like public health care and education, facilitating a high standard of living, probably most importantly, facilitating social mobility, because they were aware of the consequences of not doing so. Not necessarily because the electoral representative system effectively constrained them from doing otherwise. So just because things exist at the same time doesn't mean one of them is causing the other. So I personally don't think that the electoral representative system alone will sufficiently stand in the way of the rise of the rich effectively taking over society. And there are historical parallels of very similar developments happening in the past. So it's important to remember that these things don't just have local applications. They can be used, and should be used in my opinion, to redress the power imbalances in society and put people back in the driver's seat. So this is very far-reaching, and because of that, it's actually really important not to screw it up. And understanding why we're doing something tells us a lot about how we should be. So in that vein, I think there are two concepts from psychology that are really overlooked for the practice of digital democracy. And these are the union personality types and the dark tetrad. I've become very interested in psychology recently. So ignoring these things has led up to a lot of problems in implementation that I've seen. And I've kind of come to warn you about these mistakes that I've seen a lot of other people make over the last 10 years. So Carl Jung was obviously a very influential psychoanalyst, and among his works was the book Psychological Types, which he published in 1921, almost a century ago. And you may recognize some of this because it was later developed into the Myers-Briggs Personality Indicator, which is a kind of test people like to take on the internet. So you might know it from there. But despite the fact that that can be kind of faddish, some of these developments should not detract from the fact that Carl Jung was really onto something. You know, people have different personalities. They like different things. And without a huge amount of difficulty, you can kind of roughly categorize those things. So I think for people designing processes like these, probably the most important distinction is between introverts and extroverts. I first started thinking about this at a time when I was crossing paths a lot with people involved in the citizens' assembly movement. And something that really struck me during those years was their conviction that people, and they meant all people, wanted to spend weekends in a room with other people discussing their innermost feelings about politics. Now, I like discussing politics also, but as an introvert, I also really like just thinking about stuff on my own, talking to people when I feel like it, not as an obligation. So when I expressed this feeling to them, it was really lost on them. And it was kind of amazing to me that the people most involved in the Citizens Assembly thing did not notice that only people like them showed up. So they didn't create a democracy. They created a club of people with similar personalities and similar opinions. And really unsurprisingly, they came to similar conclusions in the end. And those conclusions did not necessarily translate to the outside world. So citizens' assemblies in Ireland were responsible for some of the most out of touch and officially rejected policy ever created in our 100-year history as a nation, as evidenced by this graph, and the referendums we all lived through there in person. So never at any point did they realize that they had created an incredibly strong filter on their participation called people who want to show up to things like that, people who care about consensus and harmony, and that they were, in other words, really hard filtering for certain personality types to come. So doesn't mean there aren't people like that who love to socialize, but you don't want to end up with that kind of flop on your hand. And it's really important to bear in mind, people participate in different ways. On digital platforms, the ones that I've looked at anyway, people tend to vote about 10 times more often than they comment. And people also comment more when they disagree with the proposal at hand, which is not surprising. But it's just important to remember that you can't even necessarily see what the voting is going to be like just based on the comments alone. Like, you can't just take a rough guess at that. The voting may be different. So people engage with the world in different ways, and it is important to accommodate that. You don't want to enforce this kind of unidirectional closeness of everyone getting along and agreeing about everything, and everything's just super smooth, because when that happens, it's usually because the people who don't like what's happening have quietly quit, and you are just not capturing their input in the process anymore. So definitely bear that in mind. Finally, the other thing we don't consider enough is the dark tetrad. So the dark tetrad is another concept from psychology that describes the interrelated personality disorders of psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, which is not technically a disorder, and sadism. So these are cumulatively relatively common personality types, especially subclinically, right? And people who have them excel at manipulation. They excel at creating chaotic situations. They are good at being bad. So if you have read or watched Game of Thrones, that was basically a great study in the dark tetrad. And the number one way the dark tetrad gets into these democratic processes today, and this is going to be probably somewhat unwelcome news, is through nonprofits. Nonprofits are, in my estimation, responsible for about 90% of the political polarization today. And this is because nonprofits have changed a lot in the last 5 to 10 years, but really in the last 5. Nonetheless, they are frequently invited into these digital democracy processes because it gives organizers an easy participation win, because they know they're going to show up and take part, and it's much easier than reaching out to individuals. However, there is a problem because nonprofits at this point are a severely underregulated industry, and industry has become the right word to describe this. So they're a mechanism that was supposed to serve freedom of association or charitable purposes, but many of them have become analogous to American super PACs at this point. So they're kind of a money chute to send money down into the political process without having to take part in the normal democratic mechanisms. And unfortunately, that is why they will always cheer on democratic innovation, because they have no intention whatsoever of taking part in a normal democratic process where you have accountability and, so on and so forth, uncertain outcomes. So this slide here is the money flow I tracked on citizens' assemblies, which was a craze of democratic innovation for a while. So you can see there's funders like Bertelsmann Stiftung, which owns Bertelsmann, which is one of the largest companies in Germany, involved in all kinds of scandals, which you can see on their Wikipedia page. Democracy Fund is financed by Piero Miglior, the founder of eBay. New Democracy is mainly funded by a multimillionaire in Australia. Porticus and Edesium, these are organizations that distribute funds from hedge funds, from investments, basically, and Open Society, which is George, now Alex Soros. And this is just part of it. This slide could be like way bigger and more complicated. At some point, it was impossible to read, so I had to let it go. This is the climate assemblies. So again, you can see this is just a small excerpt. I think it's important to say, like, you can see money coming into these organizations. You can see money going out. You don't really know whose dollars get spent where. So they mix it around in the middle. You don't really know what happens, but you can only kind of look at what comes in, what comes out. The important point is just to know that these aren't necessarily coming from average people donating or average people committing their time to the organization. So when you see organizations pop up, which we do like more and more in the English-speaking world, and they pop up with a huge amount of press coverage and a huge amount of paid jobs and like really slick marketing campaign, that is usually indicative, not that they've suddenly become very popular, but usually that something like this is going on in the background. This is an Irish organization, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties. So you can kind of see, I did this one because you can see the difference in the donations between like 2018 and 2023. So I actually called them, or I wrote to them, I should say, to ask them how many members they have, because I was interested to see like what's the relationship here. They refused to tell me how many members they have. So I can only go by what I can see. That one there, the Sigrid Rousing Trust, they are the granddaughter of a guy who invented Tetra Pak in Sweden. So just kind of close by to you guys. They, however, live in England because, you know, you have to pay tax in Sweden. So this is an American example. You can see, again, just how the funding flows. So you start with one organization, and you can see it like flowing through to like, you know, 40 organizations on the side, and that's just part of it. So this would be more complicated. There's more funders in there, but these are just simplified examples. So I did these things as illustrative examples just to show the general financial flows that most people are completely unaware of, and why would you be? This has happened in the course of a few years, so it's not like it's been going on for that long. But this is just how things work now, and there's like tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of these organizations in the Western world like this. Not just related to democracy, but related to basically any topic you can think of. So we call groups that are not large groups of people united around a common purpose, but rather organizations with employees and campaigns paid for from the top down, AstroTurf. We've called them that forever. And a lot of these AstroTurf organizations now practice what they call impact investing. Again, this comes from America. So they're trying to change society by spending money rather than by getting votes. That's like their explicit purpose. And that is an inherently dark tetrad thing to do, to say I'm just going to spend my way to victory. As a result of those beliefs, I have seen a lot of NGOs really actively engage in all those things that have proven so destructive over the past years. So bullying people who disagree with them, often to the point of trying to, you know, shove them off the stage, flooding the market with misinformation, aggressively pressuring politicians to support their often highly specific policies under the threat that they'll use their resources to smear them otherwise, utilizing lawfare to aggressively sue the state for alleged breaches of very creatively interpreted law, so suing the state into measures no one actually agreed to, and buying results in the form of sponsored research. So like some of these places are like tobacco industry level of sponsoring research. So the reason they work this way, which is actually very expensive, is because political parties and lobbying are heavily regulated. So shortcutting via NGOs is a way to get stuff done anyway without having to go through that. But actually it's just created a huge amount of bad blood. So in order to prevent this from happening, it's actually pretty easy to prevent it from happening. I would advocate in anything to do with digital democracy or that you're doing, include people and exclude non-people. So individuals should always be able to participate in what you're doing, but entities who like can't vote anyway, they have no rights, should not be allowed to participate, and they should not have a privileged role in these processes because they will use it to do what they want to do. So I could come here and say something like center people, like that would sound nice and vague and wouldn't be nearly this dark. But it really is important to understand the scale of the reason, like why you're doing it. Because when we think about design and people, like we really need to think about the psychological aspects of that. You know, what are people really like? Not what are they like ideally, like what are they really like in real life? So I think if we don't do that, a lot of the hard work that's gone into designing these tools, which has been really impressive, will go for nothing. Because once something gets very interesting and actually gets somewhere, it tends to attract also bad actors. So you have to be ready to deal with those kinds of things. So that's all I wanted to say today. Thank you very much again for having me and for coming out here so early in the morning.
Okay, now this is working and on. Okay, so thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting. But I also noticed one thing. It wasn't that much about digital democracy, and a lot about, for example, citizens' assemblies or NGOs. But let me just sort of start back to digital democracy first, and ask you then afterwards why you emphasize so much about citizen assemblies and NGOs. How do you define digital democracy so that we're all sort of on board on what we're talking about here?
Okay, yeah, I got into doing democracy. I actually come from a law background. I got into doing democracy because I was interested in investigating why we live in a world where, you know, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and people just kind of put up with that. Why would people vote for making themselves poor? It makes no sense. So I began to look at the structural issues going on with democracy, and that's kind of how I got into digital democracy. So for me, democracy is something where the people hold power. So you have the collective people holding the actual power. Who can make the actual decision in the society is the, you know, end character. So I used to lecture people and have a huge room without a microphone. So yeah, years ago the technology was not as developed, right? And so you'd kind of do a presentation where you show people what's possible. The technology is pretty developed now, actually. It's more the way people have been an issue over the past 5 maybe years or so, have kind of centered more around polarization and things like that. Like if you look at somewhere like Twitter, obviously it shows. You can have millions of people on a website conversing with each other, but they didn't ever have a decision-making process. It was always just people talking. Because people are talking, they start to get frustrated. The conversation has gone on too long, you know? It's like when you have an argument with somebody, you've talked about it for maybe, I don't know how long Norwegians normally talk for. My mother's from Argentina, so let's say you talk for 6 hours. I mean, but after that, it starts to feel at some point like that's enough, man. You know, like let it go. We're gonna make a decision now, and we're going to put this behind us. We're not going to keep talking for 15 days about the same thing. But that's what happened on the social media because they don't have decision making. It's just for talking. We're rehashing stuff from like 3 years ago, and people are sick of it, and they become very weary of this process. And so that's part of what also went wrong there. So that's why I kind of thought, okay, the digital stuff pretty good now actually, but sometimes people don't understand like why we're doing stuff, and they think, oh, talking or socializing, that's democracy. It's not really. It's democracy is a process for making decisions, a very specific process for making decisions. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get a little bit into that, because it seems like you're putting up a sort of an opposition between the citizen assembly and democracy. Is that correct, and do you think that sort of citizens assemblies and both citizen assemblies and digital tools may have a role in a more participatory and direct democracy?
Yeah. Okay. So like in the in the beginning, I did actually work a lot with the citizens assembly movement. So actually, there's like a video like we did when it was this first starting, and I think they definitely have a use. So I actually, when I was writing my PhD, I did a lot of work into ancient Greece. And in ancient Greece, there were a system of direct democracy, but there was also a system of rotating offices, right? So rotating very quickly through things was a measure they put in place mainly to prevent corruption, right? And so citizens' assemblies are kind of based on that idea. They want people to rotate through things and to have no decision makers. Things went wrong, and this is why I brought this up. Like, things went wrong for the citizens' assembly movement when they started getting a lot of money from donors who just basically wanted to use it to push through their own goals. They got very, very convinced that there were things that had to happen. So, and the only question that maybe people could be involved in is how they could do that thing, but that they've already decided they're going to do. So that went very, very badly wrong for them. And as you can, I showed on the referendums, we recently, trying to think, it was maybe a year or two ago, we had these referendums based on things that came out of these citizens' assemblies, like no one even understood what the question is, and they really resulted in like 3/4 of the population voting against the referendum. So it got kind of very, very bad that way with this kind of entitled attitude. The other problem with citizens' assemblies is that it uses a small number of people, right? So there's like 100 people, maybe 200 people. This is really, really small sample of people. Like, it is not representative of 20 million people or even 5 million people. It's really easy to skew things that way. When you sit there and do a citizens' assembly, like, and I've done them. Like, I was on the advisory board of a citizens' assembly. So they kind of sort of, you're beginning to hear presentations from everybody for like 2 days or 3 days or however long it goes on for. It doesn't matter how right or wrong you are. It doesn't matter if you think, oh, I'm more right about these things. You're now diverging from the general population. You know, you're kind of going to a special school, if you want to call it that, where you're all kind of building on each other. This is how cultures begin. You know, this is why there's like one culture in Norway and another culture in Thailand or somewhere. You know, like we've at some point people moved away. They stopped communicating. They developed a completely different language. Like, this is kind of how citizens' assemblies were working, is this divergent thought process. And so you can't really use that to stand in for decision making of the entire population, which is kind of what they got to doing. Like, they were supposed to start off as being a kind of, you know, people would talk and maybe make a question. Like, right, they would talk and come up with a question that would then go to the referendum. So no one had a problem with that point. We were like, fine, whatever, ask 100 people. Like, I ran in an election in Ireland as well. Part of running in an election in Ireland is to go canvassing door to door. So you go door to door and you talk to people. Okay, if you talk to 100 people, like, you know what the issue is in that area. Like, the 101 person usually doesn't have a surprise. You come across some interesting people, but, you know, like, on the whole, like, it doesn't take too long before you're like, oh yeah, I know the issues in this place. So no one really had a problem with citizens' assemblies being that way, of saying, we've asked 100 people and they think we should have a referendum on X, and now we're all going to decide. But they kind of stopped wanting to do that and got really, really, really pushy about prescribing things and trying to get stuff done without a referendum, and kind of using that this is some kind of authoritative decision making that represents everybody, when it didn't, as you can see, you know, like, and that's where things went wrong with them. So yeah, I mean, this is why I'm kind of very concerned with digital democracy, because I kind of saw what happened with the citizens' assembly movement, that they kind of started off pro-democracy, and then they got into being for 16 other goals, and insisted these 16 other goals happened also, but not everyone was okay with those goals. And they got very confused about what their mission is. And that's why for me it's like democracy is the mission. Like, people decide something I don't like, whatever. That's happened before, you know? I mean, it's life, right? Not everyone agrees. You don't always get your own way. So that's why I think they lost their focus on the mission, basically. Yeah.
Okay, so
doesn't mean they couldn't theoretically work, but.
So thank you so much, Rosalind. I guess there are a lot of people in the audience as well want to comment on the citizen assembly issue, and perhaps also other issues. But let's get our panelists up first. We have Alma, Elias, and then Andre. If you could just sit here, and we all have a chair ourselves. But Alma, perhaps we could start with you. I just wanted to get your general reflections on this, on digital democracy, and should we sort of use more tools for digital democracy in Norway?
Can I just
It's on.
first say something about technology and democracy in principle? Because Rosalind seems to imply that technologically things are possible, but I think that technology is a huge problem for democracy still. And the reason for that is I have been leading now for 3 years a group Design for Democracy. And we did a huge scoping review of reviewing more than 3,200 publications that are everything we could find that speaks to technology and democracy as by way of research. And we found that there is enormous set of misalignments between democracy and technology. First, people who develop technology maybe belong to introvert group and Jungian part, and they think that okay, you know, it's fun to do this because it's possible to do. It's the mentalities of software developers and designers. And this mentality, while it does get things done, it does get them done in a way that may not be conducive towards democratic participation. For example, one of the big misalignment is that technology works towards enabling access to things, but it doesn't work towards fostering something. So there are no mechanisms, once you have a portal or a digital tool, necessarily that is going to foster, to grow, to nurture communities of participation. It just makes it possible to do something. And it's also at the same time very limited. So one of the other big misalignments is who owns technology. And this is really problematic. Technology that we today use 99% of time is owned by this 1% of rich people, whom we make richer by using technologies that we use. So I think this is also a problem because it's not in the interest that we participate in something that can diminish their powers or reduce them. So we basically found 5 categories of misalignments. One is technologies that try to save democracy. This is the most numerous research arena, where there are many papers that use algorithmic tools to improve voting, to improve voter recognition, to make people part of some sort of algorithms that typically are often biased. The second group that is probably the smallest, or it is the smallest in the pool that we had among these 3,200 plus publications, was those people who see technology as a risk to democracy. But this is a very, very small group, and this group also, when they discuss risks, they don't go to criticize deep enough. They just immediately proceed to try to find remedies for these risks, which is also not beneficial for the relation between democracy and technology. The third group is community building research, which is probably the most fruitful arena. The fourth one is democracy as a lived experience through technology, and this is where I think we have a lot of opportunity for democracy. Studying how things are experienced and how things work in practice in real life world of people is crucial, and this has not been done, not very frequently. So this is definitely a misalignment between technology and democracy. And the last, what is missing, it's funny to have a category of what is missing when you're doing a scoping review, but we found that it's really serious critique is missing. We've had critique 50 years ago when researchers have found and written books and books about how if technology is non-transparent, technology is going to cause problems for democracy. So we knew this. But why was it that nobody was reacting to this? Well, it's connected probably to the first problem of capital and investment and who owns the technology. But what we can do about it is maybe a little bit more difficult. So to go back to your question, in the light of these really complex interactions between technology and democracy and long-lasting problems of democratic values and technology, like transparency, like trust, like engagement, and what engagement means on these digital platforms, These things are super important, and we don't have good answers to any of these, really. So I think that what people have started doing in the more technology-oriented democracy design, they have started looking at friction as being productive for democratic purposes. They have started looking at slow technology, where you pause before you vote, you pause and you reflect on what you're actually voting for, and things like that. But this is all, while it exists, it's still a really small part of research and a small, very small area of practice that I can see. The platforms like Decide Madrid and all of these participatory platforms, around 400 citizen platforms for budgeting being developed right now, today, I think they have this problem of fostering participation and nurturing how people engage with these platforms rather than just enabling something to happen. Enabling is easy. Maintaining, nurturing, and fostering is hard. And technology should be doing that as well. So not just opening portals, but being there to actually support people to learn how to be democratic. And that's another problem that has nothing to do with technology. That is probably that we, as a society, are being more individualistic and looking more into personal benefits than communal benefits. And this is something that actually old-time philosophers like Dewey and others have been trying to say education is important, and we need to teach people how to live with democratic values and practice them in everyday life. And if this is something that can happen, then this is also going to reflect on how we design our technologies, because they will be designed with values that we care for.
Okay, so thank you very much. I guess you have a lot of comments on all of the stuff that will come up here now, both from the panelists and the audience. So maybe you could just try to remember them. I'll help you. We only have until 9:45, so let me try to go through a few more comments. But Elias, if we could continue with you. You have been through Traverse trying to develop a digital tool for local participation. And one of the reasons, at least as you write on your website, is that a lot of the National Citizens Survey in Norway shows that 50% of people do not think that they can affect local politics through conventional means. And you use that as one of the sort of justifications of why you developed this app. Could you elaborate on this and why you are using digital tools?
Yeah, sure. We come from a design background, so we're like trained in the involving users in what we do. So like every time we'd start making some sort of service, whether physical or digital, it's like, okay, we'll have to start with the people that are going to use it. And then after school, we sort of got into a space within like urban and I'd say rural planning, and we've been working a lot with the municipalities all over Norway, and mostly planning processes where there's like a paragraph in the law that you should involve citizens, and what we saw was that there was no tools being used or no processes in place to, other than the usual like town hall meeting, which we've been to a lot of times, and it kind of attracts a sort of specific demographic. I've met tons of like retired local politicians in those sort of settings, which kind of dominate the room, and that is like the participation processes in a lot of Norwegian municipalities. That is like the one thing they do. So we've been running quite a lot of these processes, and then we saw the need for like, okay, we're doing workshops, we're visiting schools, we're walking around in the city center trying to talk to people. And there's like so many people you can meet in a day. And then that's like why we thought like, okay, we should make something like some space for people to participate without us having to actually go to them, or they have to come to like the town hall meeting on a Tuesday at 6.
like, for a lot of people that doesn't make no sense. So that's why we made like these small prototypes testing. And for us, it's like I'm not like too informed on like the higher ups processes where it gets more political. But for us, it's like basically gathering qualitative insight on an area that is going to be developed. And for instance, we worked with like a new master plan for Ålesund kommune, and then we did put a lot of effort into making these citizen meetings, trying to involve people, and we got 70 people all together that showed up. And then we had a big map where people could place, like, we asked like what areas need improvement and what areas do you like. And then we got like 1,200 proposals from citizens. So it's like more than 10 times as many. And that is not like, it's not necessarily like very politically heated things they're talking about. It's just like, this space right here is really dangerous for kids. This has, like, this area needs improvement, etc. And I think in that context, it makes a lot of sense to use these sort of tools, because you just, there exists no data from before, and to get those, we've been working a lot with maps, so to get that data into, like, give it a longitude and latitude, put it on the map, get it into a database, that's like a huge improvement for the municipality, to have that data in the system. And I think for us, we've been working really like ground up, and I guess we'll get into all these issues later on, but for us right now, it's like going from 0 to 1, basically, and I think just trying to build a better data for decision making in those like small things, not necessarily like the big health reform or whatever, but especially in like a physical planning setting, just to go from like having 0 data on what the citizens think to having some quality data that we can build on and develop further, I think.
Thank you, Elias. How about you, Andre? Are also municipality thinking in the same way, that sort of getting data on citizens' use of areas and preferences, or are the Oslo municipality thinking more about giving the citizens leverage against in the political system, as Rosalind was talking about?
Sure, thank you. I would say that Oslo municipality has over 50,000 employees. So Oslo municipality, although we communicatively have to say we're one municipality, it's consisting of a lot of autonomous individuals that host projects, and that we are really trying to push them into how they involve citizens more deeply than just, maybe sending a survey and calling it a day, I think that the technologies can make an infrastructure for participating differently and make the affordances of how you actually go out and involve more easy. So that, for example, having mapping tools allows you to do mapping. Doing that physically is difficult, right? Or collecting 1,000 inputs and actually making sense of them is really tough without having some support. So what we're trying to do is connecting these different parts of the municipality. Some are doing AI and helping us analyze large amounts of data. Maybe we could reuse the data from participation processes, like you were talking about, like questioning this model or something of, and there is actually someone making this report GPT, because I think there's around like 140 standards that a regular public official has to take into consideration in their everyday work. So it's like handling all this data, but also ensuring that the public hearing processes do more than just like ask for letters back and forth, which have been the public practice. So what we're doing now is that we're trying to structure the public hearings so that it becomes more clear what the processes are trying to understand from those that are heard in the process. And we're also working to how you visualize that data and insights that people are contributing with on the websites. Because today there's like technical technical possibilities of accessing and scrutinizing the transparency of processes, but it has a really high threshold. You have sometimes has to order like the answers from a hearing, for example. So it's also like lowering the threshold for how you can scrutinize public decision making, I think is super important, and we're working to kind of connect these while we're also hosting the public participation platform, because it's more like a way of hosting all these different processes more than that. The participation platform is not the goal in itself. It's just a neat way of organizing things so that we can actually engage people in a multitude of ways, instead of saying that you have to send letters to the municipality, or you have to like fight 5 people in a workshop to like make your voice heard in this summary. Some takes, yeah.
Yeah. But just getting back to just Elias and Andre first then. So do you think that the platforms and the tools that you're working on, do they enable participation, sort of that, or does it foster sort of participation in communities of participation and democracy? Just a short question before I give the word to Roslyn.
Yeah, I can start. I guess we're sort of the positive software developers and designers. So like our main job is to enable, going from not having anything to enabling something. But it's a really, I think it's a really good critique, because a lot of times we're gathering a lot of insight and involving citizens and doing some sort of like follow-up, but maybe after we're gone, that data that is so great, neatly organized, just stays put in its little digital cabinet. So there's also a big organizational thing here, that is like that the digital immediately, or it affects the organization, and if it doesn't, then we're sort of just as we'll just come not really that far, I think. So yeah, but I mean, for us, as like we're trying to develop this like step by step, and maybe I'm a bit too optimistic, but I feel that there are things that we can solve with technology, and I think in this space there are a lot of like the platforms that exist. I would go as far as to say that like the quality of the digital experiences are quite low, and it's like the services that we've gotten so used to, like from the tech bros in Silicon Valley, they have a really high quality of user experience, even though the intentions might not be good. But I think like there's lots for at least for us to explore on how we create these experiences of participating. How can we create a better experience for the ones receiving the data? And there's just like tons of problems to solve that I don't feel have been solved yet. So I think it's like, for me, it seems, although that has been going on for lots of years, I think it's not really a mature digital field in terms of like from an interaction design view, at least.
So if you just shortly,
I can be short on the if it fosters communities of participation or not. Like it depends on who hosts the processes. In our case, if there's like more of a engineering end of the process kind of participation where most is already decided, it's sometimes just about collecting data, as you say, right? But in other processes, like yesterday we were at Bydelshagene, for example, they are really good at talking to their locals, and they're very engaged, but they didn't have the tools to kind of expand the process beyond like having these like nice meeting spaces and meeting those that are already outside. So for them, it kind of facilitated for them to broaden the way they participate, and to, it's not like either communities of practice or you're like extracting information from 1,000 individuals. It's like they construct each other. So by having this more like deeper way of engaging and also showing digitally that happens to ensure transparency, and hosting some type of process where you have like 500 people attending, then you can kind of like have an easier way of both seeing like, this is what this like assembly or whatever they were saying, but we also have our say in this way. So I think this way of mixing methods is really important. and to show what you're doing and allow transparency in that. So that is possible to, for scholars and so forth, to actually critique the approaches and come with more like good examples of how you could design those processes.
Okay, so Rosalind, before we open for the audience, what are your thoughts on this? And
Okay,
we'll
I try to remember
get the mic
everything.
back to you,
Okay, so yeah, first of all, I agree on a lot of points. I mean, probably my worst nightmare is having like Google Vote or Microsoft Vote or something where, you know, people are asked to vote online and it goes into a black box and is controlled by some huge American conglomerate. All of the things I actually had on here were developed by very small teams. We're actually very, very selective about the tools we profile exactly for that reason and also for the user experience, which is another issue. But for example, if you contact Citizens Foundation, the first time I contacted them, I talked to Robert, who lives in Reykjavik. 10 years later, I'm still talking to Robert, who lives in Reykjavik. You call Citizens Foundation, you're going to talk to Robert, who lives in Reykjavik. You know, same with Epistemos. This is like a very small team of just a few people doing this. So these are actually pretty small grassroots tools. They should have somewhat, they will require probably some more investment behind them. But we're kind of into the opposite of some, you know, kind of big business solution to democracy technology. We kind of believe very strongly that needs to come from people, and for that to be controlled by the people who are using it. So that's to that. I think something people often think is that you're right. It's something that people made a mistake early on. I don't know if any of you have watched this satirical program, Silicon Valley, but at some point he shows, like, he invents this great, the main character invents this great thing, he shows it to a bunch of other developers, they all think it's amazing, and then they try to show it to other people, and it takes them like 3 weeks to explain it to them, right? At least, right? So it is actually very important to realize that, yes, technology doesn't change all the problems in society. You're not going to like say, oh, we put something on the internet, now we all get along, now there's no inequality, now everybody's happy again, and we're all feeling like we have a very social experience. No, that's not going to happen. However, that being said, people do use technology now in their daily lives. So to give another example, we have a consultation process in Ireland. They ask your opinion on something, and then you write it down and they throw it in the garbage, basically. So I was going to do one, I wanted to do one. It was on planning, and I feel very strongly about the planning system. Lots of thoughts on the planning system. But you have to write, like, basically an essay that is then published with your name on it, right? So I thought about it. I thought about, the housing as compared to America and Australia and whatever else, and then I scrapped that. I got going again. I got going the third time. I never submitted this paper of mine for the consultation because the process was just taking me too long. I'd sit down for an hour and do it, and then something else would come up, and I'd drop it, and I didn't get back to it in time for the deadline. So had there been something like some of these tools we have, which had said, Rosalind, like, here are the 5 things we want to know from you. What do you think about this? Maybe you think these 3 things are something else. What do you think about that? What do you think about the third thing? I would have gotten done this thing that I actually really wanted to do. I just didn't because life gets in the way. And that's the thing we have to realize. People do use technology now. People use Zoom. Like, there are people I have to remind myself I've never met in real life because I have talked to them for years. Like, I've never met Robert. No, right, I did meet Robert once. Okay, never mind. But there are people I've never met in real life because I just know them from interacting on the internet. So when you don't have that possibility, you are kind of slowing down how people are used to doing things today. I think people will still want to go to meetings and talk to people sometimes, but you don't necessarily always have, like you're saying, that moment free on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Maybe you have to get your kids from childcare or something that day or something. So that it's about giving people that flexibility on the local level. So I think that's very important. Again, I would just stress that as far as making decisions goes, democracy is not like a careful, safe process. It's a process via which we govern ourselves. I mean, one of the most successful movements in the last 10 years was the 5-star movement in Italy. They did offline, they did online. The people I spoke to from the 5-star movement were super energized about the things they were doing. They were non-voters on the whole who became active again in politics. And they ran Italy for several years. So there you go. They didn't do worse than anyone else. So it does show you how far you can get going with this. But again, they did integrate like offline and online events, so it wasn't just like a purely online thing. So it was a very lifelike integrated for that. But you know, it wasn't safe. Like they got criticized by a lot of people, and people criticized them for being unprofessional. However, when they got professional, they decided they wanted to stay in power, and that's why they're no longer the 5-star movement. You know, so being unprofessional was to some extent an advantage for them. You know, is democracy about being professional and always making the right decision and always being technically, factually correct, or is it a way for interests to negotiate in the society and make the decisions that allow them to move onwards according to what people's interests are? Like I said, the people are outside striking in front of my hotel. They're saying, I don't care what your vacation is like. You know, it's in my interest to get what I want with my bargaining power, and I'm going to use what I can to do that. So to my mind, that's more democracy rather than just trying to get everything technically right all the time.
Okay, so thank you, Rosalind. Let's get squeeze in some comments, questions, or whatever from the audience. If anyone has anything to say, I see that Sophie, you raised your hand. We have a couple of more hands here. Let's begin with Sophie.
Sure. Thank you all for your presentation and your comments. I just wanted to start by clarifying one thing, because there is a distinction between international organizations that are working to put citizen assemblies on the map and those who are actually running them. And most citizen assemblies are commissioned by government and then also funded by government, and are driven by neutral third-party secretariats who follow the OECD principles for best practice. So I think that's quite important to just clarify. And then I thought your slide, Rosalind, on the personalities was really interesting. Because our experience running citizen assemblies on a national level in Norway is that we really do have the introverts in the room. And what kind of distinguishes citizen assemblies from other conventional methods is that people get knowledge, they get time, they work in small groups, they think individually. So it's not like a debate where you have all the extroverts like fighting for the right answer. And that makes it quite different. And you also deliberate on the dilemmas. Like you spend a lot of time understanding what are the way-offs, what are the pros and cons, what if we want to have something, it costs something, as opposed to a poll or other methods where you just kind of say what you want without understanding that there's a way off. And that, I think, gives a much bigger political understanding. You understand how politics actually works. So it's educating people in democracy. And I think that kind of differs from referendums as well, because it gives people kind of a background to their opinions instead of just asking people what they think when they're not really thinking. So at the same time, I agree, like technology reaches a lot more people. So I'm really curious as to how can technology enhance what we already have and use that as a tool. And I really like what you said, Alma, that we need more friction. Like I really think our democracy needs more friction. So how can we create that respectful friction online? Because we have friction online now, but now it's more fighting. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how we can create digital respectful friction. But also if the digital sphere can create more nuanced opinions or just opinions. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophia. We'll try to get a few more comments in before we get back to all of you.
Thank you. As a citizen, I love this discussion. Thank you. As a professional, I work with digital public infrastructure. We help countries go away from Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and into open source. And what we see is that, yes, a lot of the time, what happens is this idea that social media is a democratic technology in some respect, but that the incentive there is to sell ads and to generate outrage rather than democratic participation. So it's not really fit for the purpose of democracy. And when we see governments try to start with some sort of project within digital democracy, they end up either buying from a company, right? Whether it's big tech or mid tech, like the friends in Belgium, or building something that is fit for purpose that they can only use, and all of that effort is only good for one thing. So I guess my question is, how does open source fit in all of this discussion? How do digital public goods fit in all these discussions? Because we do have software that is democratically run, which is democratically governed by their communities, and that actually does, have these conversations embedded in it. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, you just have to remember the comments and the questions here now.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask a question about technology and direct democracy, and the deliberation or lack of deliberation in such processes, and how this all ties in with misinformation. Like Sophia was referring to, if you ask people what they're thinking when they're not really thinking, how can we implement deliberation in online processes? Have you seen good examples of this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Okay. So I see at least 3 sort of issues or questions here. So, but the 2 are aligned. I guess it's sort of the advantage of citizen assembly is that you don't only have a yes or no, but you have a deliberation on this issue. How can you build deliberation into digital platforms? Is it at all possible? And also a question about open software. So let's start with Rosalind, and we go through the whole panel, and maybe you can also try to sum up a little bit your thoughts on the conversation so far, because we have to end quite soon, but the I guess we'll keep on talking after the streaming is over.
And also the public participation platform, I changed the phases now, so you also have you can actually continue the conversation as well, and give your thoughts and ideas of how we could improve the digital democracy. Just put that up in the end.
Thank you.
Okay, is this on? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, so to answer, no, it's not on. Is it on now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So to answer the question about the open source, yeah, I mean, there are some places that do open source. On our report, we will always say if a software is open source, but you've definitely put your finger on one of the big issues here, which is that people are trying to develop something as a public good. They've put a lot of time and effort into it. Some of them are happy to do that as open source. Some people also feel like they should at least make some money on this thing that they're doing full time and devoting their life to, right? So there is a kind of, I don't know, I guess, difficult bridge there. Myself, personally, I'm in favor of never making any money off of this. I feel like, did Rousseau make money off of what he did? Or did Voltaire? Did people, is democracy just about making money and trying to survive that way? Or is it something you're doing as a voluntary public good that's for everyone? That's my view on it. But on our report, we'll always say if something is open source or not open source. To get to the other questions, yes, about deliberation. Sure, there's lots of things that use comments, that have comments integrated. People can talk to each other. They can comment on things. I think that, usually goes fine. Like I'm saying, once you get rid of external actors, which could take 2 forms, or either NGOs, or sometimes there are people, very prolific people from other areas. So you might be running something in Oslo, and people come from America to comment on it or something, as another arena for them. So, but once you exclude them, once you do what Andre was saying and verify the participants, usually the number of really disruptive things is very low. I also think we don't have to be, and I mean, that's everywhere. I don't think we have to also be too picky about what we say is disruptive. I mean, people can get into a bit of a spat. Like, that's normal, It doesn't have to be everyone's locked in frosty politeness every minute of the day, So you kind of have to ask yourself, where is a sensible, borderline between, just having a bit of a spat with somebody, or, things getting abusive and the sadists and the Machiavellians showing up. Yeah, but, they have that ability built in, a lot of them, to comment with other people and to have that talk. I do think, however, we need to be a bit cautious about saying that people need to be educated into doing democracy. I mean, most people know that things cost money. This is not some concept most people have a problem with. So I do think the citizens' assembly movement has really over-indexed on this, like, you're just not thinking about things right now, that's why you disagree with me. You know, people came to have this idea, if only you're informed, you will agree with me. If you don't agree with me, you must not be informed yet. I mean, I go to vote in referendums along with every other person who's entitled to in Ireland. I mean, some people have a higher level of education, some people don't. It doesn't matter. Like, people all have a right to vote. I mean, just because I haven't participated in some kind of deliberation, official deliberation, doesn't mean I haven't thought about my vote before I go cast it. So I think there's also like a point where people are being too condescending to other people and their abilities. I'd also like to make one final comment about the OECD guidelines. Those guidelines were created by excluding all people who disagreed with citizens' assemblies from that debate. It was an invitation-only debate, complained about it at the time, not just myself, also a lot of other people. They made these guidelines, they've now gone around the world, and this is what I meant by misinformation. In addition to telling people all kinds of things about Ireland, they've gone around the world telling people that these are some kind of neutral academic guidelines that everyone agreed on. A lot of the people there were like not qualified in any way, and they were, like I said, it was something that they just excluded anyone who disagreed with them from this. So they use that as this kind of basis on which to base everything else. It was really not well done at all. But I mean, I also don't like spending my entire life dealing with citizens' assemblies. I feel like they did a lot of damage, and I mean, a lot of the funding has pulled out of it anyway. So, but it's just a good example of something where they push everybody who didn't agree with them out of any conversation about it. The same with these recommendations. I mean, if I look at citizens' assemblies in Ireland, yes, they were financed by the government to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. But as someone who's kind of, I guess, like in the thick of things in Dublin, I can tell you the name of every single person who's spoken at those citizens' assemblies. I mean, we all know each other. This is not a just, you know, free-for-all. Let's just put it that way, right? We all know each other, and the recommendations that have come out, what they'll do is you'll have like 80 or 100 or 120 recommendations, right? So some of them are can't even both be done at the same time, like they're mutually exclusive. But apart from that, they are spending a lot of money. If you did all of the Citizens' Assembly recommendations in Ireland, you'd probably almost bankrupt our country, even though we're very rich and have a huge budget surplus. So these are kind of like issues that have happened, and there's also, like I said, a lot of misinformation that's been put up about it, and that misinformation has been enabled by often a lot of bullying of people. Just like they won't allow you to come, and you know, they also will like refuse to debate you and things like that. So
Okay, Alma, how do you sum up your thoughts?
Okay. A little bit about the good examples. When I first time several years ago saw We Taiwan and Audrey Tang's talks on YouTube and TED and so on and so forth, I was really delighted. I thought this is absolutely great. Audrey Tang is a digital minister of Taiwan and has a line of different ways of engaging citizens, which I thought is really, really fantastic. But then a colleague of mine from my department, from our group, was traveling to Taiwan, and I asked her, hey, can you ask ordinary citizens, some friends or some people on the street, if they know about We Taiwan? And she did, and she came back and she said, yeah, some have heard, some have never heard, but that was it. So there was no report back, oh, I'm using it, it's great, and you know. So I think there is a problem of visibility of these platforms as well, so not just of, but how to share with citizenship, so how to know in Oslo, for example, that we have this Oslo Commune platform that we can go and take active part in. So visibility, legitimacy, trust into these different platforms is super important. Digital sovereignty is a buzzword that has to do with, you know, how open or who owns the sources that you want to use. And I remember I've seen a talk last week by a colleague of mine who reminded me of 2012, where we tried to boycott at University of Oslo Microsoft. and Microsoft Teams later, and we totally failed. So institutional democracy is non-existent when it comes to money-making decisions, and this was investment. University of Oslo still pays about 16 million kroner per year for Microsoft licenses, and there is more than just me who absolutely hates this. So yeah, I think the issue of visibility, the issue of participation, of fostering will to be part of general education of people to want to take part in democratic processes, digital or not, is super important. And we, in Norway, although it's really strong democracy, I think we still have ways to go on this plan.
Thank you, Alma.
Yeah, I guess I can just touch on two things. I think for the open source platforms, I think it's really great. But we've seen with the municipalities that we've been working with that they tried out the DSIM, for instance. There was like a piloting program in Norway for DSIM. But still, like, it's not like you can't just start it out of the box. You'll have to hire a developer. Maybe you don't know a developer. Maybe you hire a bad developer, for all I know. And it can be a quite costly activity, even though like the start price is free. And it kind of for me it seems like it generated quite a lot of problems for them. So yeah, I think if the open source, if the SDM had like a dedicated team and they could set it up for you, whatnot, if that was funded by someone, that would be great. But I think open source in itself, at least like in a practical sense, doesn't solve that much for a municipality wanting to involve citizens. And I think also, I just want to touch on the point that we haven't talked too much about, and that is like, all right, the tool exists, but how do we recruit people? What are the challenges for recruitment? And first it's like, okay, should we run ads on Facebook? And it's like, no, that doesn't make sense. But also that is like a sort of a big worry, I think, for a lot of people. Like, how do we recruit? How do we create like a, what sort of platforms can we use to recruit? Is it like, do we send out a text message to all citizens? I don't know, but like that is also a huge like pain point today. Like, okay, great, they get into the platform, and there needs to be some sort of I don't know, friction in some sense, but like still, like we involved, there was 1,200 citizens partaking in the process, but there was still, I don't know, what is it, 59,000 that didn't participate. There's also something there with the recruiting. And just as you said, like also Kommune has this platform, but how do we get more people to use it? How does it become like a part of the everyday life? That was, I know it's maybe that's also probably a bit naive, but I would feel like, okay, we're all spending time on our phones all day. Like if we could spend like 5 minutes doing something important, that would be could have a huge impact. But like we have such a long way to go before that happens, I feel.
Okay, so this room is definitely not full of introverts that don't like to talk. So we're already way over. Do you have some short words to say, and how did it work with the exercise that we did online?
Right. So while I get that up, I'm just going to reflect a little bit. So on the open source, we also piloted the DSIM in Oslo municipality, but we ran into the same issue that Elias is talking about, that someone needs to set it up. And although I would love for us to have like a teams of programmers, they're doing a lot of other things as well, and actually getting money to work on public participation was a real struggle. And it's just the easier threshold to get like a ready-made platform. But I would really wish that we would make our own platforms based on our own needs, but that requires a lot of energy. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that there's practical reasons for why we choose not to. And on the deliberation part, right? So you could, if you enter the process again, you can now, without logging in, share some of your ideas about the digital democracy and kind of maybe contribute with some of the things that were bubbling in your head while you were hearing us talk a lot. And this is at least like 13 of you participating in this part. I haven't used this function before, so I also wanted to test it to see like how well it functions. And I'm not going to read all of these different parts of the conversation, but those that are more like people are more challenged on these issues, I think those are more important because that kind of shows that where, like speaking of deliberation, kind of like sometimes it's good to also take a temperature check for what do we need to deliberate on, right? So in this sense, I would use this probably more as a temperature to like see, okay, what are the different, I can make this in English as well, or in Arabic, it seems I clicked now, which wasn't the point. Right, so digital platforms gets the amount, but not the deep local insight. And that people are really split between that. So I guess people have different experiences of that. Again, there's not a huge amount of people that have said anything on this, but I would say the people in this room are pretty well informed because they chose to show up early for this event. And on the deliberation, I think those need to be done physically as the technology is today, but I know that people are working with AI-enabled deliberation, and that's a thing that people are talking about. I haven't seen it function, but the idea is that you could scale out deliberation to actually reach a huge amount of people. But again, I haven't seen it being done. I've just seen people theorize about it and talking about some tests. So I wouldn't jump into it before I see it. And just with simple things, just like sharing ideas, it's functions need to be pretty like easy to use for people to actually use them and to communicate the Oslo platform. Is like people don't wake up a morning and think I'm going to participate in some process. So it's like we try to reach people with the processes that are relevant to them and help the project leaders that are having one process to actually reach out. And then the newspapers help a lot. And then we're trying to make a campaign pretty soon to kind of spread it. But we didn't want to communicate a platform just for a platform's sake. It's more about the processes. We're not trying to sell anything, really. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andre, and please continue to contribute here. And a round of applause to everyone who participated in the panel. And Roslyn, I guess you're selling some of your books there, or you can take a look at them. So please stay around. I guess that's possible, Sophia. Yeah, it won't be used for anything else now. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.